Call to order the planning commission special meeting for the 18th of March. Mr. Holt, welcome, and please call the roll.
Thank you. Dr. Ullman.
Here.
Dr. Ullman represents the Roberts District. Mr. May.
Here.
Mr. May represents the Powhatan District. Mr. Everson.
Here.
Mr. Everson represents the Stonehouse District. Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Mr. Rogers represents the Berkeley District. Mr. Haldeman.
Here.
Mr. Haldeman is an at-large member. Mr. O'Connor.
Present.
Mr. O'Connor is an at-large member. Mr. Polster.
Here.
Mr. Polster represents the Jamestown District and is chair of the commission. Mrs. Stennis could not be with us this evening. I'm Paul Holt, Director of Community Development. Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. The first item on our agenda is the annual organizational meeting and its election of officers. Do I have a nomination for the Planning Commission Chair, please?
I'd like to nominate Tim O'Connor.
We have Mr. O'Connor. Any other nominations? Hearing and hearing none, I will, Mr., do you have one? Hearing and seeing none, I will close the nominations. We have a voice.
Just a voice vote, yes,
Okay,
sir.
all in favor, Mr. O'Connor, for next year's chair?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Congratulations, take over.
You're still late.
Oh, no, the switch is right now.
No, it's April 1st.
Okay, the next item for officers is the nomination for the Planning Commission Vice Chair. Do I have a nomination?
I'll nominate Mr. Haldeman unless he's opposed.
Mr. Haldeman, any objections?
No.
Okay, any hearing and seeing no other nominations? Can I have a voice vote for Mr. Haldeman to be the Vice Chair for next year? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Mr. Haldeman, you have the job. Okay, the next item we have is the proposed calendar for 24-25. Any discussions or recommended changes and additions? Go ahead, please.
We had brought up the issue about the 5 o'clock versus 6 o'clock.
Right,
6 o'clock is what's been included.
it's in the agenda, it's 6.
Oh, it's at 6. My mistake.
Any other changes? Policy Committee meeting, DRC, we're going to keep them where they are, 3 and 4, right?
Fine by me.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the Planning Commission calendar for 24-25?
I'll move.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? We have approved the calendar. Moving right on to the public hearing, our first item is the fiscal year 2025-2029 Capital Improvement Program. Ms. Costello, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The Policy Committee met in February of this year to discuss and evaluate this year's Capital Improvement Program requests. Starting this year, the Policy Committee reviewed new applications or those with significant changes. There were 5 projects, all from James City County Department, submitted for consideration. Committee members use a standardized set of ranking criteria to prioritize each application. This is provided in your packets for reference. The scores generated by individual committee members were then averaged and standardized through a Z-score process to produce a prioritized list. On the screen is the ranking according to the Z-scores that were produced. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend approval of these priorities to the Board of Supervisors for consideration during the budget process. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff? Mr. Holman?
Just one, Ms. Costello. I just wanted to be clear. I'm fine with this, by the way, with the rankings. The difference between the score, the actual score, and the Z-score, I'm not a statistician. I took statistics 101 400 years ago, but I always thought the Z-score was a measure of the disbursement from the mean. It's not it's not a ranking score itself. It helps us understand how widely dispersed the numbers are around the mean. And if I'm right about that, and I'm not sure I am, I wonder about and it doesn't make that much difference here tonight, so I'm just asking for my own personal edification. Should we be using the Z-score to actually rank these projects in the future, or should we be using the regular PC score?
I mean, that's
Policy
up to the
committee score.
commission. We started using Z-scores at your request, I think, 2 years ago.
Oh, you're right about that.
Usually there's one or two instances where it might be one place or another. Usually it's the same, the ranking's the same. In this case, there's a little bit of a difference.
Not much. Yeah,
Not
that's why I'm
much.
saying I'm not making an issue out of this. I'm just trying to understand it.
It's up to the commission if you want to continue using Z-scores or if you want to use the PC score.
That's just something to think about going
I
forward.
was the one that introduced that, and it was based on Rob Rose's use of Z-scores over at the college when they were doing evaluations of participants or faculty members. And the idea about that was that in some cases, I have a tendency to probably, given the criteria that we have, rate very hard, okay? And there's a set of, I think, 10 criteria, and they're weighted for it, which then finally gives you the number. On the other hand, Mr. Haldeman has a tendency to be very generous in his, and so when you do the Z-score, you get the dispersion of what it comes down to. But the real purpose of the Z-scores was to see if we were on kind of in the ballpark for it. So if you take a look at last year's list that you have in front of you with 32 projects, trying to come to some understanding of what the top 10 should be, the top 20, and the bottom was a bit of a challenge. And so what the Z-scores did for us automatically is there was absolutely, zip for the top 10. And in the top 20, maybe a little movement. And of course, there is, just because it has a score there doesn't mean that the policy committee or the planning commission can't adjust where they are. So it is a start point to have a conversation so that everybody can see if we're right in the same ballpark as opposed to out in the parking lot for it. And I found it kind of useful, especially when you're dealing with a large number of that for it. I will admit that for this year, it really kind of didn't make any sense, except that we never really kind of adjusted where they would be relative to anything else or any of the other things. But anyhow, that's the purpose of that for the Z-scores, and that's why you see both the average scores and that. But once again, if you go back and take a look at the other list and see what the averages are in the Z-scores and what there were some movement around those priorities. And that really is the point. It's up to this planning commission to decide what that ranking should be. And we're going to get to that tonight. Any other questions on that for staff?
I have one question. The PC score, 100's the maximum, right?
Yes.
Wow.
Any other questions for staff? If not, thank you very much, Ms. Costello. And at this point, I will open the public hearing. Do we have any speaker cards, Mr. Holt?
No, sir, we do not.
At this point, I will close the public hearing and open it for discussion. And if you all don't mind, since I'm the troublemaker on this thing, I will start off. So in your packet you have in front of you, the first one are the items that have the red projects in it. And it's 1 to 32 actually, because the adjustment is the stormwater, which is actually the number 1, and I missed out on that. When we started, the policy committee started looking at the CIP list for this year, I asked a series of questions. And the first set of questions I said is, the items in red aren't on your new list. Why is that? And I didn't get an answer. And of course, you know why, based on where we are here. The second thing was I asked the question about firehouse number 6, which was on the 215 and 216 CIP listed at 6 and then at 3. And that firehouse, Mr. Haldeman brought up last year, and we asked about it. I asked about it again this year and didn't get an answer. And the key to that is that when you prioritize some of these programs, the firehouse and the police happen to be one, the comp plan has a level of service. And if you're not meeting that level of service, it's an idea about you're getting ready to get a new one, right? Or replace it. Of the 5 firehouses that we have, if you look at last year's approved budget, the overall level of service was 6.1. But I happen to know that the probably 4 and 5 were higher. And I asked for that data so that we could see what the actual level of service would be in that 6 minute and then outside of that piece. In addition to that, the people who are outside of that area, in the Stonehouse area, pay a higher insurance rate because of that lack of coverage. Anyhow, that's an example of a project that didn't show up on either one of these lists. There are projects here that we prioritize, as you can see, very high. The New Grove Area Library that didn't get funded. There is nothing in the lower county to support those folks. And the idea on this project was to renovate the rec center, the Fiscal Rec Center, because the county was going to get a new rec center down there. And the Friends of the Library were going to help renovate that. The Human Services, I'm not really sure if that's going to be included in the new government facility or not, but I asked that question and never really got an answer. On the Business Ready one, I've asked 3 years in a row if the funds that were going to be used to bring the level of visibility of that project so that it could be developed required 50% funding from the landowner. And I've asked that question now 3 years in a row. Is the landowner willing to pay the 50%? And of course, I never got an answer. The JCS Library 25 in Croker is, I don't know if you all, I'm sure, Scott, you know about that library, and you know what a wonderful program they have for kids and all that. And they were going to put an addition onto that for a theater so they could do some more programming on that. The last one that's on that list has been one that's been showing up on our CIP list now for the last 4 years, 3 years. And the issue is, where is that library going to be? And the city of Williamsburg wants it there. The county wants it out here. I mean, we got to figure out where we want it if we're going to put that kind of money associated in it. And that's why I believe that the Policy Committee and the Planning Commission put it at the bottom. So that's the background of how I got to where we are on this list. And as you saw in the email that I sent to you, I asked for some guidance from the county attorney. And it's really up to the Planning Commission to come up with a list. And I thought that the start point ought to be what you prioritize, what we prioritized last year, which are the 2 spreadsheets that you have here. And as a start point, I took the Z-scores for the new projects for the 25-29, and I put them in a relative position based on their Z-score, just as a start point. And so I'm open to any questions or discussions, and I think, as I said in my email to everybody, the idea is to come up with one consolidated list with all these projects melded together and recommend it to the board. Questions, comments, discussions?
Have we decided that that's what we're going to do?
I'm sorry?
Have we decided that that's
It's
what
the
we're
right
going
of
to
the
do?
Planning Commission to do that, period. And that was confirmed with my correspondence with the,
But we haven't decided we're going to do it then?
no, that's what we're talking about. That's what the whole point of this discussion is.
Just to repeat what Mr. Everson, the point Mr. Everson made, the, all 5 scores on this year's projects are lower than every score on last year's projects, whether they were funded or not, except for the library, which was a special case. It's just a point.
Mr. Holt, when the Planning Commission sends this forward to the board, what exact impact does that have on the board? In other words, they have things that they're going to do, like they're talking about this new county complex, and regardless of what the score is here, it seems to me that they're going to move forward. Is that a reasonable statement, that they're going to move forward with a county complex at some point in the next several years, regardless of what the score is here.
To date, they've entered into an interim agreement, and that's, what the work that's currently underway, yes.
So when we send these scores to them, do you have any sense of what the impact of these scores are on with them, or?
I think the answer is that it's not the scores. It's the relative priority that shows up in the budget, which is what this is.
That's my point.
Right. But they're going to decide, they're going to take our input, whether it's the sheets or not, and they're going to make some decisions on the priority and the funding of that. It's our job to make a recommendation to them, and the funding is not ours, it's the board's. And how they shuffle them around or whatever. I will just tell you that my understanding is that with the budget that's coming up on the,
Month.
okay, they rarely have a chance to look at these as part of that. This is going to be probably the first time. And so they are anxious to hear what the priorities are of the Planning Commission.
So was there an action on these items in red that aren't included? I mean, did the board decide not to fund them in past CIPs?
It's a good question, because I asked that question, if you recall, in writing at our very first meeting, and was told, not your business. And that's why we're here, because it is our business. And so I leave that to the board to figure out what they want to do.
So, as staff articulated in the first policy committee packet, so the policy committee this year was asked to review new applications or those with significant changes. And those are the 5 you see represented on the screen.
So in theory, sorry, just for my own clarification. So in theory, if these are if these are the 5 new applications and they've been ranked in the way that they are, they've received the Z scores they've received, all of which are lower, as you pointed out, than the Z scores of the recommended projects that weren't funded. If they slot in where they're meant to be, they still will appear lower in the ranking, and that is the recommendation that will go to the board.
Recommendation of the list of what we're going to send is yet to be determined. And as several of you have pointed out, with a recommendation to take the 5 because of the low scores and put them at the bottom of the list. And so they would end up as 33,
I see.
4,
Okay.
5, 6, and 7, 8.
I see.
I mean, and that's a decision for us to decide on what the relative priority is of this entire list that we want to send. Okay? And it's up to the board to figure out what they are going to fund or not fund or whatever. That's
And
their,
I'm sorry, and I think historically, to Mr. Polster's point, if it was funded, we would see that every year. So, so this became just a sort of a comparative of 5 entries as opposed to 30. So, so I think that had an influence on how they were weighted, because usually there's general agreement in the top 10 submissions that come in, and then the rest of it, there's a discussion about where does it fall into that ranking. So just because the score comes down to 35, we might say, oh, collectively it should be higher, and here are the reasons why. So, I think that's Frank's point, is these 5 are sort of done in the vacuum, absent the other 32 that were out there.
well, and the ones in red might not have even shown up, just like the firehouse hasn't shown up since it was originally proposed.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
okay, I'm sorry.
No.
Yes, sir.
The items in black have been funded,
They have.
so there's no reason for us to rank those now, correct?
I'm just suggesting you send one list for it. And remember that some of these projects may change by the board because of the different priorities that they have. So for example, the one that we brought up about the county new building, if you listen to the last board meeting, consensus was to go ahead with the design, but reserve the right to come back and review whether they go forward with it based on that study. And so you have that possibility. You have the other piece that I'll introduce is we're going to adjust the tax rate. And so there's some things that may not make this thing. But then on the other hand, we're going to go out to all of the districts and we're going to ask for input about what you think is important and what you're willing to fund above the zero figure. And I, for one, am going to go out and advocate for some of these projects in red, and especially the 6th Firehouse. Let the board know.
Which isn't on here,
Pardon?
which isn't on.
Which isn't on here, and I've been willing to take a suggestion that we add it to it. But that's what this discussion is about. What are the priorities? And that's what the discussion is going to be in terms of the tax increase. What are the priorities and what do you want to fund? Okay? And so I'll introduce two other things, the projects that are on this list that you may not know about, is if you take a look at Terry's spreadsheet here, and you look at the costs for the general services. My good colleague, Mr. O'Connor, opined that you could get a 40 square foot cost cheaper than that, and this is building an $80 a square foot as opposed to 40. And why aren't you thinking about renting? The other question that we used is on the firing range, which is $1.2 million to do the construction, which you can see on there, is why didn't you guys think about putting a trailer as opposed to a permanent facility, which is what we use for the schools at a cheaper cost? And nobody's arguing that you shouldn't have the range because it's popped up in 2 other CIPs which we've approved. So the range and the expansion of it and the need to have it isn't the issue. So whether it gets funded or not, that's part of the reason why you see these projects at the bottom of the list. So when we get these, we see all the entire funding for it. How much of the land's going to cost, what the equipment's going to cost, what the design's going to cost, and what the construction cost is going to be, which is what these figures are and the ones that you see on the other list. So one of the things that we're supposed to consider is cost, believe it or not. That's one of the other things that's in the code. And it certainly drove some of our decisions in how we rank these things, especially these 5.
So let me come back to one of the earlier questions. I will add just for clarification to what I thought I heard as an earlier question. So, it may be helpful to remember too, we're currently in the fiscal year 2024 year, and with that, there is an adopted 5-year CIP. The board adopts a 5-year CIP. So for the cycle that we are currently in, that's going to be the fiscal year 24 through 28. And so I think, as raised earlier, many of these projects that you see on Mr. Polster's list are from the 24 through 28 fiscal years. And so to the degree that those existing projects may or may not be contained within the existing adopted 5-year CIP, I think really what you're seeing here is in sort of the relative ranking of these 5 are for the new year, fiscal year 29. That's not currently in the adopted fiscal year CIP. That's only for the new 5th year, which is going to be, so, the budget that's getting ready to be discussed and reviewed is going to be the 25 through 29. So, again, really there are 2 new requests on your sheet that have requested fiscal year 24 through 28 funds, and those are going to, again, be the 2 new requests, the 2 rows there at the bottom. So, if that sort of helps you think through these lists and how it sort of ranks relative to the others, remember for your top 3 projects there, those aren't in the fiscal year 24 through 28 CIP already, and they're requesting 29 funds. So for that year, there'd be those 3 projects.
To Mr. Holt's comment is, I will tell you that when we started this off last year, I asked the question, why are we looking at everything again, especially since you've funded them? Well, there's 2 things. There's the appropriation of the fund, and then there's something that's on a list. Now, the things that are in 24, I agree. But the fact of the matter is, if you go back and take a look at that budget, is we're planning to borrow $254 million in '28 to fund the majority of these programs. So we haven't appropriated the fund, nor have we decided that we're going to build some of these projects yet. The importance of this list is for us to tell the board what we think the priorities are for the citizens of this county for what we know. I would have gladly excluded some of these programs if I would have been afforded an answer. But I wasn't. And so I wouldn't argue about Fire Station 3 at all, because we need to expand that back end so we can put the new equipment in it. The transportation match for the last 5 years has helped to fund Long Hill and underground utilities, an upgrade to the JCS line in there. It's funded the drainage issue in Tohano and BMP's up at that end. It's funded the Skiffs Creek connector, and it's getting ready to fund the widening of the Grove Road of 60 through there, which will fix the stormwater flooding that goes into neighborhood yards that makes their septic fields inoperable because of the habitual drainage issue there. And that's going to get fixed because of the stormwater program at the top here, which is taking money, and the transportation match. And Mr. Holt is going to get a traffic circle at Centerville to fix that problem, and that money's going to come out of there, and we're going to see the Croker Road fixed this year to 4 lanes. And so I'm not arguing about these at the top or the Lower County Park, that we don't have a facility down there and have it. And so there's an equity issue for that. So if I would have gotten some answers, the open space program, for the first time, we started putting money to do purchase development rights to preserve the county, which we didn't have a fund for. So I'm not talking about those programs and the relative program, but I wish I would have gotten an answer. And then we could have skipped this.
So these 5 projects aren't till 29? Is that what I heard you say?
Which project?
The 5 on this list here that we got.
No, they're multiple years. The stormwater program is 12 million over 5 years.
No, I'm talking about the 5 here on the, you know.
The first 3 are fiscal year '29. The bottom 2 are asking for funding, the police facility fiscal year '27, and the warehouse is fiscal year '25 for planning and design, and then construction and outer years of '26 and '27.
Mr. Holt, couldn't the board come back with these unfunded items from '24, '28? The board can come back and vote now to fund them. Now another year has passed, right? They voted last year not to fund these. For example, the new Grove Area Library, that's not funded.
I lost track over what's in the current one. So I don't want to answer that definitively just because I don't know sitting here.
Well, assuming that this list is correct, look, we'll just assume it is, whether it is or it isn't. And we'll assume the board has not funded the new Grove Area Library.
That's a fact. You can go to the budget and look at it. I did.
Okay, but, so we'll deal with that as a fact. Operationally, when they voted on this last year, they voted not to fund that. They can come back this year and decide to fund it.
Oh, sure, there's a lot of discretion the board has in adopting a budget, yes, sir.
I would think, okay, so.
But isn't it also true, like the new Grove Area Library, the Library Theater for Croker, the new library, I mean, those are controlled by, and the same thing for Health and Human Services and WJCC. Those are other entities that are driving that piece. So, it's not necessarily just that the board has said we're not funding. We all know the challenge with the new library was to figure out where it was going to be located, which kind of would have well, would have certainly have driven the way some of us scored that in prior years. So I'm sort of, these all are sort of separate entities that don't fall to the purview of the Board of Supervisors, except economic development and stormwater.
I think it's correct to say that whether or not it is a joint funding issue between the city and the county would end up paying the majority of the money. And so the county supervisors would decide whether or not they want to fund their portion. And in the case of the Grove, it was being primarily paid for by the Friends of the Library in a small renovation. The Croker Theater would have been all of the James City County. And so that's just the way these bills get divvied up. And the same thing is true for the pre-K that we had. I mean, I think it's like 90-some-odd% for the funding of that is going to come out of the county. And you got less than 8% that's coming from the city. So, you know, the board certainly does care about how it spends its money on everything.
Frank, can you put what you want us to do into a motion so we can decide?
Well, I think, let me see if we have a consensus. I think what I'm hearing is that the top five, the five new programs that we have right here is in that order would go to the bottom of the list.
That's not what I'm hearing, so.
Okay, I mean, I'm just trying to get a consensus of where we are, which is why a discussion. So,
Now, we come back to Z-scores. The Z-scores don't matter to me much on these, among these five, but when you put them back into this list, they become prominent again. For example, the Project C has a policy ranking of 22, which, as Mr. Polster said, would put it way at the bottom of this. But the Z-score would put it up to number 6 or number 7, right above community development.
I think you're mixing Z-scores from this that didn't, versus what was done before. So if these five projects competed with the entire 32, their Z-score would be different.
Oh, okay, I didn't understand that, okay. So we can't use Z-scores if we're gonna use,
I think they're useless, because they're apples and oranges.
so we're back to the PC score.
Right,
And that
exactly.
puts them all at the bottom, you're right. Okay,
I'm still looking for a consensus. I think Mr. O'Connor is still thinking about that. Steve?
I just have to say, or do what I think I'm understanding, so fix me if I'm off. Is it coming down to the idea that we would decide as a group that the work done for this initial list, that we still think that was really good work, and we care about the way these are ranked as they're typed here,
Right.
as opposed to just focusing on this set of 5 and saying, go with this 5. We want to take the 5 and say, we still care about how we ordered these, we're going to stick them in this now.
That's my opinion, because not only did we prioritize it that way last year, but the board approved it, and it's in their document that they approved last year for the budget. Okay? And so I'm not trying to change those priorities, to tell you the truth. But I am trying to make sure that these get put in there so that the board has everything.
So as an example, if we all agreed, it would be that the planning commission is saying, you know what, no matter what, we think the stormwater issue is the most important issue of all, which is how it's here. And we like these 5 you're looking at now, but we certainly don't want you to forget that we still want to go with our number 1.
And and the planning commission gets to do that every year, to revise that list. And that's been the principle that I've been involved with, is we weren't given a chance to revise the complete list. And we can.
You would have felt better if they had this list, and then you take these, and then they would rank accordingly, because you might have one of these go up considerably higher than we have here based on this total list.
I would have felt better from the very beginning through we went through 4 meetings. I would have been more comfortable if I would have gotten my questions answered and seen the list there. And we would have gone through all the back and forth and all the rest of it and come to you with a list. But that's not what it ended up as. And that's where we are.
Could we vote on these 5 in one motion and then offer a resolution or a sense of the commission? 3 things. Number 1, these 5 are not as important as most of the unfunded projects from last year. That's just our sense. Number 2, that the police classroom should consider other alternatives, such as trailers, such as a trailer on a pad.
Modular building.
Or a modular building, okay? And number 3, that the warehouse is way too expensive, that's our sense, and that the county should consider either buying an existing warehouse or renting. So those are two different actions. One is consistent with the direction we were given.
What was the direction?
The direction we were given was just to rank these 5, that's all. And
That-
I understand we have wider latitude than that,
Right,
but that was our direction, so
right.
that's just a suggestion. So,
Well, I'm happy about the comments, because they should be part of the minutes. And when we finally get to the motion, I will ask that Mr. Haldeman's comments be included. I think it's important for us to tell the board what the overall priorities are. And they can figure out the rest of it without any ambiguity. And we don't need to give them a sensing or whatever. It's a vote. And what they do with the vote is up to them. But it ought to be a representative of the total CIP needs of the county in one list. And I agree about the caveats. And so the question is do we still have any consensus about taking these 5 projects and putting them at the end of the list?
I can support that.
Scott?
Yeah, I can support that.
Kira?
Yeah, I can support that.
Steve?
Yep. Yes.
Alderman? Okay. You have a reservation, please.
no, I don't.
No. He's staring.
Well, these top 3 programs are fiscal year '29, so they're not even part of this list of 32, to Mr. Holt's point, because these are all funded. I guess as we're having this conversation, our process is making a little more sense to me this year than in the past, because, if we want to have a discussion about ranking projects, it should be a discussion about what are the unfunded projects versus this whole list of 32, because the board has already said we're funding these projects. So, and we gave them a ranking last year.
The exception that I take is the board hasn't decided that. That's the appropriation piece of it. And so to your point, if you take a look at the stormwater, okay, they definitely are going to fund the 24, right? But the 25, 26, 27, and the 29, they're new projects on that stormwater 29. Those are new. They've never seen them before, and neither did we, by the way. And there are projects on there that are going to fix the Yarmouth and Powhatan watershed that they've never seen before, but they're not going to know that because the Planning Commission never had an opportunity to take a look at that. I mean, I bet you if I would have looked at that transportation match, I would have seen that traffic circle on that list. Okay, but how is anybody going to know what's on there? So there are some of these things that either change over time because of priorities. Okay, and so the issue is what are the priorities and how they fund it or what they do. That's not us.
I think, Frank, can I follow on that too? And I don't mean to mix federal, state, and county budgeting all in one, because I'm sure there are nuances, but at least the way I was understanding it was you may have an appropriation which has a big dollar sign at the top, but unless you down the road get an authorization to actually put that money on a project, you don't have anything. So at least in the federal government, we get appropriations all the time, and then we find out that our structure was milconned, it's called, or whatever, it gets sent to the bottom, and we never see it. So I guess I'm still a little curious. I started this thinking these were not all funded. It's that we think there's an appropriation for all 32.
And for some of them, they are funded in the fiscal year. And you can go and take a look at the budget and you can see that line item for each of these things. And you can see exactly when it's going to come up. And it's not that I'm trying to get in the business of the financial management, because they've got to start to look at what they're going to bond. And as I made the comment before, they're looking at $250 some odd million to borrow in 28 to be able to fund a lot of these projects. But they've still got a way to go, but they've got to start putting the signposts on there. And the signposts will change as you move along, and that's based on priorities. So the board's going to figure that out. I think it's up to us to make sure that they know what all the priorities are.
You just repeat, sorry for me, then what the difference was between the black and the red ink.
Right. If you went and took a look at the approved budget, okay, that's online, the ones in red are not funded.
Not funded.
Not funded,
I thought, okay, that's what.
okay? Not funded. And so my original question when we started this process is, well, geez, maybe we want to submit them again and get them funded because they were good ideas. But I never got a chance to have that conversation. We're still thinking about this, Mr. O'Connor. You're still,
I'm just trying to, just curious as to where all this, had we looked at these all in the policy committee, would we end up with the same sort of ranking that we're having as a discussion tonight? Because there's usually a fair amount of back and forth as to where to place some of these things. So, you know.
I think it would be close. We had we had 4 meetings last year, as opposed to 2 this year. And we had staff come in to some of our meetings to respond to questions. This list from last year got a pretty good vetting, as I recall. Now, a year has passed and maybe priorities have changed a little bit, but I would think the list would look very similar if we went through the same process today. And I think that the 5 new ones would fit in pretty close to the bottom.
See, I'd probably look at the bottom 4 or 5 as being the bottom of the list, period. You know, like the skate park, I would suspect would be lower than the classroom facility at the police firing range, or some of the more expanded programs at for Parks and Rec, or
Well, we gave the skate park a 34 last time. You're right, it's very close to the bottom. But it's still 10 points higher than anything on this list. Maybe,
The skate park, though, is tied into the county office complex.
that's another good point, yeah, because the one we have now is gonna be gone
Right.
when the county
So
complex.
that's gonna move up just when they start pushing dirt out there.
any other discussion?
so I don't know where I fall, so
Okay.
I won't belabor the point
Right.
just because
Okay.
I'm
I'm gonna-
undecided,
right.
so.
I'll make the motion then, I will make the motion that the spreadsheet that you have here and the 5 that we have here, the 5 here go at the bottom. And the list that goes forward is a combined list with the 5 at the bottom and what was submitted last year, with the caveats of adding Mr. Haldeman's comments back to the board. And you want to repeat that, or do you
We
have
could,
those?
we could just make that as a special, resolution
for
or
the minutes.
sense of the board, yeah.
I will do my best. I can repeat that back since
Okay.
you made it in the form of a motion. And let me know where I get it wrong. I try my best. You all know that. All right,
Welcome
so
back.
Mr. Polster, as I understand, your motion is to adopt the spreadsheet that you had provided to the commission this evening that includes both the black and the red colored font.
Right?
That the list that's currently on your screens, the big screen here with the 5 project and its recommendations, be left in that same order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but be added to the bottom of the list. So presumably that would be 32, 33,
No,
34.
no, it'll be 33, 34, 35, 36, and 37.
Okay.
There's the number 1 is missing, that's why you want to use this.
Okay. And so that's the motion, and then we will also provide the board with a draft copy of the minutes from tonight, which will be sure to capture Mr. Haldeman's statements that the projects on the list currently before you up on the screen would not be as important as these ones here listed on Mr. Polster's paper, that the police classroom be something else, like modular construction or trailer, and noting that the PC's recommendation that the warehouse be revisited that is currently proposed, it's too expensive.
I think that captures it, doesn't it, Mr. Alderman?
It's fine with me, yep. Well done.
All right.
You got it.
Well done.
I won't be able
That's
to
why
say it a
you're here.
second time, but we're recording the
You're here.
meeting, so.
That's why you're here.
Okay.
We have a motion.
If I second it, do I have to repeat it?
You don't even have to second it, so you don't have to do either one. Don't need a second.
If we can vote?
He's going to call a roll call.
Yeah. Dr. Allman,
Aye.
Mr. May. Yes. Mr. Everson,
Aye.
Mr. Rogers,
Aye.
Mr. Haldeman,
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor,
No.
and Mr. Polster.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Moving on to Planning Commission discussions and requests. Do you have anything, Mr. Holt?
Nothing for you this evening, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I do have one item. As I noticed that the board is kind of punted on the solar, can you tell us what the status is of the ordinance and the policy?
You know, the board has asked us to revisit the policy aspect of it, so we're currently doing that and have not yet scheduled a time to get back before the board for some additional clarification and review. Certainly, as we spoke about a lot this evening, the month of April will be very focused on everything budget. And so we're gonna try to identify the soonest opportunity we can to get back before the board on that to get some further clarity and direction.
Any other questions for Mr. Holt? Sir?
So that won't be on your next agenda. We'll
Okay.
have that sort out a little bit and we'll be back with you on that part.
All right, I'd like to have a motion to adjourn the Planning Commission meeting.
Please.
I'm
But
sorry.
it's not for Mr. Holt.
Oh,
I'm just realizing that I'm probably out of order, but on the schedule, I have a DRC meeting on Wednesday, and right now, there's only 2 members. So I don't believe I have a forum, and I'm just
For
asked-
next week, I do believe we have an action, a master plan consistency action item.
So I was told today.
Yeah.
So I'm just
So,
wondering
Let's
if we can
catch
get,
up with you offline and come up with an alternative. And we'll figure out how to get that to work, because I know that particular item does need some action.
well, I think what we can do, it's next week, so it's in March, right? All right, so,
scheduled today.
pardon?
Called and told, it's been on the website, I'm sorry, not today. It's been on the website as this week,
Okay, but
but that's incorrect.
right,
and
but the
they've not
chairman
changed.
has the opportunity to make sure we do have a quorum, okay? So, do I have a volunteer to serve on the DRC to finish out? Scott?
Yes, sir, I would volunteer for that
Okay, so that
assignment.
gives us 3, 4, so we will have a quorum. Okay?
It's a master plan consistency determination with the War Hill Sports Complex, so it's pretty straightforward, and Mr. May will make sure you get a copy of that agenda.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So that is next Wednesday at 4:00.
We'll send out an email confirming all of that. That's what I
Whatever the
seem to
website
recall in
says.
my head.
I take it from what you said that we're not gonna have, the solar ordinance that we were looking at is now completely on hold, that we won't be looking at that next month.
We don't have it scheduled to come back for you from a public hearing. We need to do another check-in with the board first. And then I'll have a little bit better idea of the path forward. But we've been asked to reprioritize looking at the resolution for now, so we're gonna start there, do a check-in with the board and see what they want us to do.
Any other questions for
stay
Mr. Holt? Seeing and hearing none?
You missed us, didn't you?
Had to find a reason to come back. So. Scheduling conflict tonight worked to my favor. So.
All right, so I need a motion to adjourn the planning commission meeting for 3 April when Mr. O'Connor assumes the gavel. Do I have a motion? Voice vote, please. All in favor?
Aye.
All in favor? No? Any opposed? No. Meeting adjourned.